Welcome back to the course Make It Work React Hooks by Fang. This is the third video in the series, useEffect for side effects.
In the previous video, we worked on our Pokemon app and added a search of Pokemons based on the user input. We created a list of 8 handmade Pokemons to search from. In this video, we want to make it real so that we can search through a complete list of Pokemons that can be provided via online API. Alright, before we do that, let's clean up the Pokemon.tsx file a bit. We want to create a new file, PokemonSearch.tsx, to hold the majority of what we have done for search. This way, we can have room to put a new code for fetching the list. Knowing when to spin a new file is a vital step to grow the project. Notice the styles we did for search can be entirely relocated to PokemonSearch.module.css file. So let's rename it, and then we can come back to import the right file. The Pokemon type is a general type to define Pokemon item that most likely can be referenced by multiple components in the future. Remember, this is TypeScript, so everything needs to be strongly typed. Let's create a new file, PokemonType.tsx, and copy the definition over and export it. So in the PokemonSearch.tsx file, we can re-import it here and use it. Next thing here is that instead of a fixed list, we want to pass the fetched list, which we're going to build later, into this Pokemon search component through a prop. Prop is a standard way to pass data among components in React. Here we basically create an interface to define a list prop holding an array of Pokemon type item. And then we come to change the component name into Pokemon search with the defined interface. We want to keep the majority of the search functionality intact in this newly created component file. Basically, we're just renaming the component to a new name and export it. Now, since we moved the search functionality out, we can come back to clean the original Pokemon.tsx file, where basically we can delete the majority of the stuff and make it clean and expandable. We can import the Pokemon type here, since we need to have a list of Pokemon in this file to pass into the Pokemon search component we just added. We keep the list for now, but we can remove all the lines from the rendering section and replace it with the Pokemon search component. In order to use it, we need to import it. Also, we forgot the prop list, which we're added now, and pass the list in. Cool, let's play with it and see after this cleanup, everything is still wired up correctly. Since it's all working, now we're staying in this Pokemon file and see if we can fetch the list over the internet to replace our current list. Alright, we're going to use a fetch command, and it takes input of internet address that's copied over. This is a Pokemon list items that I can find over the internet. Alright, so after it's returned, I'd like to assemble a list of JSON format. And also that's console log just to see what it looked like. Alright, cool. So it fetched 1,200 records. Okay, since it put everything under the results attribute, let's dig in and see if we can refine the data returned a little bit. So we could console log results. And of course, we can just start to define the data into items. So we copy the lines over the next line. And so we can print out the items directly. Okay, cool. And now we can dig into each individual records. Let's see what it looks like. So it does export a name, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay. But it also export a URL, but we only want the ID in the string. We can write a quick utility function to facilitate this conversion from a string into an ID. So we're just going to quickly write it. No fancy stuff. We're just going to split the string into multiple parts, separated by the slash. And then we're going to take the one next to the last part, which hopefully is just the ID. So let's give a shot. All right, let's take the first item in the list and see if we can just apply our algorithm to it and hopefully get the ID extracted. All right, let's try it. Oops, we actually get arrows, so let's debug a little bit, see what actually went wrong. Okay, I see what happened. Instead of passing a string of URL, I actually passed the entire object, the first item. So let's fix that by adding the .url. Let's give it a shot again. Okay, cool. All right, we get a 1. Awesome. We should be able to use this utility to wrap up the rest of the parser. Now the rest of the job is to basically create a list based on the returned list from the API. Essentially, we want to get a type of item in our format, the Pokemon type, instead of the API structure. So basically, we want to draft ID and name. And now it comes to the question, where do we store this newly created list? We have to hold it inside this component because without it, we will not be able to hold this variable during multiple renders of the Pokemon. So you guessed it right. We need to use the hook that we learned from the previous chapter, which is the useState. All right, so with the useState, you can define a list and set list. All right, so now with that, we can come back here and just set the list. And so let's get rid of the old list and we should be able to get a go. Now we can give it a shot. All right, let's come back to the search and let's type ch and go. Whoa, look at how many things we're having here. We're searching through 1,200 records instead of 8 records we used to have. I mean, we do get some 404 errors, but that is mostly because some of the picture cannot be loaded. Maybe it's just missing from the internet. We're gonna fix that in the future videos, okay? Although it seems we get our job done, there's something I want to point out to the version we just wrote. Don't try it in our production side. So I'll explain why. For any statement defined inside the function component body directly, it will be invoked every time this component is re-rendered. If we get a closer look at our code, when the component is rendered the first time, it'll go fetch. If successful, it'll assemble the list and assign it to a state. And setting a state will trigger a new render as we have learned in the previous useState video. When the component re-renders, we'll enter this function once again. Do you see what goes wrong? It actually goes into this function again and again in an endless loop. Therefore, it could crash your computer or the server you want to fetch from. To remedy this, we can for now add a condition if statement to break the loop in case the list has been already fetched. Okay, now we know what's not working, but what option do we have? Luckily, React provides us a hook called useEffect to help us. Instead of adding the action directly as we did, React wants us to wrap it with the useEffect function. And interestingly, there's not much change we need to make. We basically import the useEffect from React and use it to wrap our action. Don't worry if you don't get the syntax yet. We'll explain it in detail shortly. For now, let's give it a shot and see if everything still works. Bingo. Now we get to know what React wants us to do, but why? I'm sure you have the question in mind. Why React doesn't want us to invoke the action right away? And what is the name effect in useEffect hook coming from? The answer starts from the action itself. For instance, in the fetch action case, we do a request to the server, and the request goes through the internet and then returns back with the response. This process is pretty common to the web developer these days, but the process isn't implemented by the React. It's actually implemented by the browser. So to React, everything that is not taken care of by it is still referred as the external world. And when you try to access the external world, either to read from or write to it, the action is referred as an effect. As a good practice, we tend to design a solution for managing these effects. Basically, the strategy is to defer the execution of them till the point that they carry the minimum impact to the internal system. At that point, we safely execute the effects, and normally in a bundle. This is done in such a controlled manner. And this is how React deals with effects as well. Depending on the external services React needs to deal with, effects have many kinds. I won't get into all types of effects here, but one of them React decides to expose to the developer is called a passive effects. After all components finish the render, then the passive reacts are invoked to minimize the impact to the DOM elements. So to make a guess, yes, useEffect is the hook so that we can create a passive effect to make sure our action can be safely executed. So this is all what useEffect is about. Now let's take a look at the usage of this useEffect hook. The useEffect hook function takes two input parameters and returns nothing. The first parameter is the action that we want to perform, which we already know. And the second parameter, called the dependency array, the most interesting part, is used to specify when we want to invoke this action. The action by default gets invoked after the first render, the mount. And this is independent from whether we provide the second parameter or not. But given the dependency array, we can further add additional invocations. Let's take a look at all possibilities. If you omit the parameter, for instance, by not providing the dependency array, the function will be invoked every time when the component is rendered. We know this is not what we wanted, and to be honest, we have spent a lot of time earlier trying not to get into this scenario. So not providing the second parameter isn't recommended. What's common is to provide a dependency array. When any element of the array changes, any of them, either A or B, the action is then invoked after the component re-renders. Here A or B can be local variables or state variables defined in any of the hooks. You might wonder how React determines whether A or B changes. You can refer to the discussion in the previous video where we talk about how React determines the state change. React follows the exact same logic here. Okay, why providing the dependency array? There actually exists a special scenario case when the array actually contains no element. When that happens, the action is believed to be muted and is not supposed to be invoked anymore after the first render. So this actually is the version we used in our fetch case. It fired once at the mount, and then only once. Awesome! Good job getting this far. In this video, we fetched the list of Pokemons by using the useEffect hook. So we have gone through the most common React hooks, useState and useEffect. The former gives you a way to define state, and the latter gives you a way to define an action. If you can master these two, you should be able to handle majority of the component work. So I suggest you to go practice and apply them to your work today. Good luck! When you're back, we'll continue introducing you more React building hooks. See you there.